Hollywood is reeling today after a heartbreaking revelation shook social media. Billy Crystal has finally broken his silence about the death surrounding Rob Reiner, and what he revealed has left fans devastated, confused, and desperate for answers. For decades, Billy and Rob weren't just colleagues, they were brothers in spirit. From the early days of Hollywood comedy to the golden era of movie directing, their bond was built on shared dreams, shared grief, and shared history. But today, Billy's voice carried a pain the world has never heard before. Just minutes ago, Billy Crystal stepped before cameras with red eyes and a trembling voice, confirming the rumors people whispered about but never believed. Rob Reiner has been living under the shadow of multiple personal losses, and now the truth behind those deaths is being exposed. Billy spoke slowly, almost struggling to breathe as he described the emotional toll that has followed Rob like a storm family tragedies. Deaths that were never discussed publicly, and grief that Hollywood politely ignored because the cameras needed to keep rolling. What stunned fans most was Billy Crystal admitting he regrets staying silent for so long. "I should have said something earlier," he whispered. "I should have been there. I didn't know how deep it went." His words left the room frozen. Billy then revealed details so raw, so intimate that the audience gasped. How Rob spent nights crying alone, how he blamed himself for decisions he never made, and how every funeral added another scar to a heart already drowning in sorrow. People watching the interview said, Billy Crystal looked shattered, like a man who had finally spoken the truth after years of carrying a secret too. Heavy to bear that the news broke like thunder at sunrise, rolling across Hollywood with a force nobody saw coming. Studios froze, phones buzzed nonstop, and social media erupted into stunned silence as Billy Crystal, one of comedy's most respected legends, finally spoke out. His voice, usually filled with humor and warmth, carried a heaviness the world had never heard from him before. The cameras were set, journalists stood shoulder to shoulder, and Billy stepped up to the microphone with trembling hands. The man who had made millions laugh for decades now looked heartbroken, hollowed out, and unbearably fragile. His eyes glistened with tears as he began to speak about the deaths surrounding his lifelong friend Rob Reiner. The room leaned in, breathless, sensing something earth-shaking was about to unfold. Billy took a long pause, closing his eyes as though gathering the strength to rip open wounds he had hidden for years. "This isn't easy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I owe Rob the truth. I owe the world the truth." Reporters exchanged confused looks. Truth about what? Rumors had swirled for years about tragedies in Rob Reiner's life, whispers of losses that were never discussed publicly, but no one expected answers. And certainly not from Billy Crystal, who had always protected Rob like family. He continued, voice trembling with grief. "Rob wasn't just mourning one death," he said. "He was haunted by several silent deaths that people never knew about." The room gasped. Rob Reiner had always seemed larger than life, a director who shaped modern cinema, a storyteller who filled screens with joy and hope. Nobody imagined that behind the cameras, his world had been crumbling. Billy spoke of nights when Rob disappeared from parties, nights when he would sit alone in dark corners staring at photographs. He described a man drowning in memories he could not escape. Billy's hands shook harder as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "He never wanted this shared," he explained. "But I can't carry it anymore." The room tightened, the silence deafening. Billy read quietly, a private letter Rob had once written to him in a moment of despair. In it, Rob confessed how the death of a family member shattered him, how another close friend's passing only deepened the wound, and how Hollywood pressure forced him to smile on red carpets. Even when he wanted to disappear, the shock in the room turned into heartbreak. These weren't just stories. They were pieces of a man breaking apart. Billy admitted he had been afraid to speak earlier, afraid to expose pain that wasn't his. But with the most recent tragedy now public, a death within Rob's circle that fans still struggled to accept, Billy felt silence had turned into betrayal. "He hid behind strength," Billy said, wiping tears. But inside, he was hurting more than anyone knew. He explained that Rob's cheerful interviews were masks, that his directing years were fueled more by distraction than passion, and that he blamed himself for the people he lost, even when it wasn't his fault. Billy stared at the reporters, voice shaking. He carried those ghosts for decades. The crowd stood still. Some wiped their eyes. Others whispered in disbelief. Nobody expected Billy to paint such a raw, vulnerable picture of a Hollywood icon. Nobody expected him to reveal that the man behind comedy and cinema magic was silently falling apart. And then, Billy delivered the most shocking admission of all. With his voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Rob once told me he didn't think he'd survive another loss." Another pause followed. And then, another loss came. The room gasped as Billy lowered his gaze, shoulders trembling beneath the weight of his grief. Outside the press hall, fans gathered behind barricades, clutching posters and photographs from Rob's greatest films. Many had tears streaming down their faces, whispering prayers, refusing to believe their hero had suffered so deeply. Rob Reiner had shaped childhoods, defined generations, and given people comfort through art. No one imagined he had paid for that legacy with pieces of his soul. Billy ended the statement with a final message. Rob Reiner deserves love, not rumors. Truth, not silence. I hope tonight people finally see the man behind the movies. Then he stepped away from the microphones broken, leaving the world stunned and desperate to know one thing. Whose death finally pushed Rob Reiner past the breaking point, and why was this truth hidden for so long? The world exploded with questions after Billy Crystal left the podium. Reporters rushed outside into the frenzy, cameras flashing like lightning, microphones thrust toward anyone who might know more. Social media flooded with theories, fear, and disbelief. But in the quiet corners of Hollywood, away from the chaos, one person sat holding the weight of every word Billy had spoken. Rob Reiner himself. Inside his dimly lit home office, surrounded by film posters and dusty awards, Rob stared at his television screen, replaying Billy's emotional statement. His hands trembled as he lowered the remote. The house felt impossibly silent, almost suffocating, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Rob's eyes were swollen from crying. His posture slouched with defeat. He had not asked Billy Crystal to speak. He had not prepared for the world to learn the truth. And yet, deep in his heart, he understood why Billy did it. He whispered to himself, it was time. His voice cracked. He stood slowly from his chair and walked to the window, gazing at the sunset bleeding across the sky. The colors reminded him of old film reels, each shade carrying memories he wished he could erase. On his desk lay 3 photographs. One was of his late mother, Estelle, smiling through laughter. Another was his younger brother, Lucas, gone before anyone expected it. The third was of his longtime friend and collaborator, someone the world still didn't know had passed months earlier. Someone Billy had been referring to, someone whose death had been kept private until now. Rob picked up that photo and pressed it against his chest. Tears spilled freely. Losing that friend had shattered something inside him, something no one could fix. His phone buzzed. A private call from Billy. Rob hesitated before answering. "I saw what you did," he whispered. Billy's voice on the other end was thick with emotion. "I couldn't watch you suffer alone anymore." Rob closed his eyes. "You didn't have to carry that burden." Billy inhaled shakily. "I've carried it since the funeral you never attended." Silence. Heavy, painful silence. Rob opened his mouth, but no words came. Billy continued softly. "You ran from grief, Rob. You shut everyone out. And now it's destroying you." Rob lowered himself into his chair, trembling. "I didn't run," he finally said. "I just didn't know how to stay." They talked for several minutes, 2 aging men stripped of jokes and bravado, speaking from wounds they never wanted the world to see. Billy begged him to come forward, to share the truth behind the tragedies that pushed him toward collapse. "People care about you," Billy insisted. "They deserve to hear your voice before rumors rewrite your story." But Rob wasn't sure. Public honesty would mean reopening scars he had sealed decades ago. It would mean revisiting the night his brother died, a night he blamed himself for, even though the world told him he wasn't at fault. It would mean facing the truth about the friend he lost to illness, someone he swore to protect from public spectacle. Later that evening, Rob stepped outside into his backyard. The air was cool and the faint sound of passing cars hummed in the distance. He sat on a bench beneath an old oak tree, the place he always went when he needed to think. His father had planted that tree when Rob was a boy. Under its branches, Rob had written his first movie idea, kissed his first love, and years later, sat with Billy laughing about the absurdity of Hollywood. Now, beneath that same tree, Rob felt his heart cracking. He whispered into the wind, "What do they want from me?" The answer arrived in the form of memories, faces he had lost. His mother's warm hands, his brother's laughter, the drained. He walked into his kitchen, where a framed picture of Billy stood on the shelf. He picked it up, traced a finger along the glass, and spoke aloud, "Thank you." Then he made the call to his agent, to the networks, to the press. His voice shook, but his tone was resolute. "It's time for me to speak." Because hidden beneath Billy Crystal's shocking confession was a deeper truth, one that would soon shake Hollywood even harder. The death Billy hinted at wasn't the only mystery. Rob Reiner was ready to reveal something darker. That one of the deaths in his life was no accident at all. Reiner sat alone in the dim glow of his office, the hum of the city outside barely reaching him. He had made the call earlier, setting up interviews, preparing statements, arranging for his voice to be heard after decades of silence. Yet now that the moment had arrived, a storm of dread consumed him. Speaking the truth about the death surrounding his life meant reopening wounds he had fought to bury. It meant revealing parts of his heart that even Billy Crystal hadn't seen. But he knew it had to be done. The world deserved clarity, and he needed release. The first death had been a quiet one, known only to a few, his mother Estelle. She had passed in the early hours of a winter morning, her illness slow and merciful. Yet Rob had blamed himself for decades for not visiting more often, for being distracted by film sets and scripts. Her absence left a hole that no career triumph could fill, and he carried it silently, stuffing grief into the corners of his life. He remembered sitting beside her bed in the hospital, holding her hand, pretending he understood how fragile life could be. That hand, now gone, was the first reminder that loss could never be escaped. Then came his younger brother, Lucas, whose death was sudden, violent, and utterly preventable. Rob replayed that night endlessly. Could he have called? Could he have stopped it? The questions haunted him like ghosts, and each funeral pushed him further into the shadows of grief. Hollywood continued as if nothing had changed, demanding smiles, premieres, interviews, scripts. But behind the public persona, he crumbled a little more each day. Billy Crystal had watched him, seen the slow erosion of his spirit, yet had never intervened until now. The third and most shocking loss had occurred in secrecy. A close friend and collaborator, someone integral to Rob's life and career, had passed under circumstances Rob had never shared. He had promised to protect the story, to shield it from gossip and speculation. But the weight of that promise became unbearable. Rob had avoided answering questions, dodged conversations, and concealed pain that refused to be ignored. Every news segment, every social media comment, every Hollywood reunion reminded him of what he could not talk about. That night, alone in his office, Rob traced the edges of the photographs he kept on his desk. Each frame told a story of love and tragedy, triumph and despair. He realized that silence had not healed. It had festered. He remembered Billy Crystal's words from earlier. "Silence is killing you." And he understood now that speaking was not just about the world. It was about survival. He picked up the phone and dialed a producer, his hands trembling. "I want to do an interview," he said. "I want to tell the truth. Everything." The producer hesitated, sensing the gravity in his voice. "Are you sure?" they asked. Rob exhaled, long and slow. "I've been sure for too long not to." As he prepared for the cameras, Rob thought about the moment that would finally be shared with the world. He thought about the people who loved him, the fans who never knew the human cost behind the films, the friends he had lost. He knew it would be painful. He knew it would be criticized. But he also knew that honesty, raw and unfiltered, was the only way to reclaim the pieces of himself that had been lost to shame and secrecy. That evening, under the studio lights, Rob faced the questions he had avoided for decades. Each answer, each pause, each tremor in his voice revealed layers of a man who had lived in both brilliance and darkness. He spoke of grief, of regret, of mistakes that no one could undo. He admitted faults, but he also celebrated moments of love, moments of laughter, moments that had defined a life not only in public achievement, but in deeply human experience. When the cameras stopped rolling, Rob stepped outside, feeling the night air against his face. For the first time in years, he felt a strange lightness, as if the act of speaking had lifted an invisible weight. The deaths he had endured were still real, still painful, but they no longer had the power to silence him. Somewhere behind him, Billy Crystal watched, smiling faintly, tears brimming. He understood what Rob now understood. Truth, no matter how devastating, was a kind of liberation. And for Rob Reiner, after decades of hidden sorrow, liberation had finally arrived. The next morning, Hollywood woke to chaos. Headlines screamed Rob Reiner's name, and social media exploded with disbelief and sorrow. Fans flooded Twitter and Instagram with messages, sharing memories of his films and expressing shock at the revelations Billy Crystal had helped bring to light. News anchors replayed segments of the interviews, each clip capturing Rob's trembling voice and haunted eyes. Behind the facade of the industry's glamour, a storm was brewing. And Rob knew that the fallout would reach every corner of the entertainment world inside his home. Rob watched it all unfold on a wall of television screens. Every network, every online outlet, every streaming report repeated the story, dissecting it, speculating on the tragedies that had shaped his life. He felt exposed in a way he never had before. Every secret, every hidden sorrow, every quiet death now public knowledge. The sensation was surreal, as if he were standing on the edge of a stage with the spotlight burning directly into his soul. But despite the fear, a strange sense of relief coursed through him. For decades, he had carried these truths alone. Now, the world knew. Yet the reactions weren't all sympathetic. Some journalists and critics questioned his timing, accusing him of using tragedy to revive public interest in his career. Others speculated that the revelations were exaggerated, a Hollywood stunt. Rob felt the sting but quickly pushed it aside. This was never about headlines or career boosts. It was about finally being honest, not only with the world but with himself. He could no longer hide behind smiles and scripts, pretending the losses hadn't shaped him. Billy Crystal called him that afternoon, voice full of concern. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Rob paused, looking out over the city skyline, the sunlight reflecting off the skyscrapers like shards of glass. "It's overwhelming," he admitted. "But it's also freeing." Billy chuckled softly, though there was sadness behind it. "I told you. Silence only keeps the pain alive longer." Rob nodded silently, absorbing the truth in Billy's words. The public response continued to pour in. Fans shared stories of how Rob's films had helped them through grief, loss, and hardship. Celebrities posted heartfelt messages of support, praising him for his courage and honesty. Some even shared their own experiences with tragedy, creating a wave of empathy and solidarity that reminded Rob why he had chosen to speak out. The world could be harsh, cruel, and unforgiving, but it could also be compassionate, understanding, and human. By evening, Rob was exhausted. He sat alone in his living room, the city lights blinking in the distance. The walls that once felt confining now seemed protective. He thought of the people he had lost: his mother, his brother, his friend, and felt their presence like a gentle weight on his shoulders. He realized that speaking the truth hadn't erased the pain, but it had allowed him to honor their memories openly. The grief was still there, but it no longer had the power to isolate him in silence. Rob reached for his phone and typed a short message to his closest friends. "I'm finally okay with being seen. Finally okay with being human." It was simple, but it carried the weight of decades of hidden sorrow. He leaned back, eyes closing, allowing himself a deep breath. For the first time in years, he felt a small measure of peace, of fragile, glowing ember in the darkness. Later that night, he walked to the oak tree in his backyard. The same tree under which he had pondered life's biggest questions for years. The cool night air brushed his face, carrying the faint sounds of the city that never sleeps. He whispered softly, "I've survived the worst. And I'll keep surviving." He looked up at the stars, knowing the world had witnessed his pain and resilience, and that somehow, even in grief, there was hope. Billy Crystal's intervention had sparked the moment that Rob had needed to confront his past. But the journey wasn't over. The revelations had opened doors to new truths, new stories, and new confrontations with a Hollywood that had long demanded silence. And as Rob stood beneath the tree, He understood that while the world now knew his story, he was still writing the rest of it one honest day at a time.